everybody, welcome back to my channel, All the Shelves. I'm Whitney, and today I'm going to be telling you about the books that I read in the first half of April. The first book that I read in April was Sacred by Dennis Lehane. This is the third in the Kenzie and Gennaro series that I've been kind of working through. And the reason I started that series was because I was on vacation and I needed something really easy. And I do want to stress that these books are like the epitome of easy. I don't feel like there's a whole lot of substance in here to dig out. They're just like kind of fun mystery type crime novels. They take a lot from noir 1930s type attitude, and then they've kind of like injected it into a contemporary Boston setting. So I like Boston. I like the two characters. I'll continue to read these. This one has to do with cults, which I was very interested in, but did not quite fulfill my expectations for that. I would not necessarily recommend Sacred to someone unless they were reading through the Kenzie and Gennaro and wanted to see how those characters developed. The next one in the series, though, is Gone Baby Gone, and I did want to read the 3 books leading up to that. I love the Ben Affleck directed and Casey Affleck starring movie, Gone Baby Gone, so I'm excited to kind of compare and contrast those. Next up, I read the next 4 books in the Little House series. I read the last 3 last month, and this month I read On the Banks of Plum Creek, The Long Winter, By the Shores of Silver Lake, and Little Town on the Prairie. I remember On the Banks of Plum Creek the most from when I was a kid, because this is the one where they're living in a dugout, which as a kid I just thought was like the most magical idea. I mean, basically they get to be a hobbit but in the Wild West. What could be better than that, right? On rereading, it was not the most compelling of the series. The ending was also very weird. Like, this isn't even really a spoiler. I'm going to tell you about the last chapter though, in case you're afraid of spoilers. But it just ends like, and there were lots of mosquitoes, the end. I mean, it's just very abrupt, and the reason for that kind of ending becomes clear in the next novel, but it just didn't quite work as a standalone. My favorite so far in the whole series has been The Long Winter. This one is the most narrative and plot driven of the entire series. That takes place over a single winter that's very long, as you'd expect, and it's just about how the family survives in a budding township in the West in like this horribly long winter when nobody has quite prepared for it. And I really liked how she had to take her time describing the setting and the season so carefully. The rest of the books really move through time quite quickly with a couple chapters devoted to each season, but this one really slowed down, and as a result you get a lot more character development in this one, and you get a lot more of a personalized experience of the West rather than just a series of chores and food that the settlers had to do, which is also fun, but this is a different kind of pleasure. My least favorite was Little Town on the Prairie, which I think described maybe the worst childhood ever, and I feel like it just kept talking about it like it was this wonderful thing. The way that boys and girls interacted, her school experience, the things that they did for fun, like it just started to come across as really sad. In the beginning when they're kids, you're like, oh, okay, I could see how like a child who had never seen a Christmas tree before would be so excited to see a Christmas tree. This one, you're just like, okay, you've seen this stuff now, like you need to maybe like move on with your life, maybe get excited about something else. It just gets kind of depressing to me, and I am kind of thinking that the rest of the series will go that way for me, but I really do want to wrap it up. I want to see her and Almanzo get together, and I want to see her teach school and all that. So I have 2 more to read, and then I will make a review video for the whole Little House series. The next book that I read is called Myths America Lives by Richard Hughes. I read this because I needed some really concrete ways to explain the idea of myth and American myth to my students that weren't only frontier myths, because frontier myths are what I am most familiar with. But this one does such a great job of breaking down 5 different myths that he feels are very prominent from the beginning of American society. So you have the myth of a Christian nation, the myth of an innocent nation, of a chosen nation, of a natural nation, etc. And how all of those myths started out as these really beautiful ideals, but then kind of got corrupted in what he calls absolutized. So maybe corrupted corrupted isn't the right word, because it's actually the absolute version of those myths where you kind of think that America is the only natural nation chosen by God, and that means that that can justify everything that America then participates in. The one that I was just like fascinated by, that kind of blew my mind, was America as a Christian nation. I had always, heard people describe us as a Christian nation, and I'm always the, annoying liberal that's like, well, actually, it didn't say God in the Pledge of Allegiance to Eisenhower or whatever. But to actually hear how that process was undertaken, why it made the turns that it did at the times that it did, and then what has happened in contemporary, I think this book was 2003, but like relatively contemporary politics. And I think that that has only been exacerbated, especially as you watch the 2016 election. Like, this book makes so much sense. So if you're looking for a fairly short read about American myths, I felt like this one was academic but totally accessible to everyone, I think, and it was good. The other one I read for class was Jill Lepore's The Secret History of Wonder Woman. I talked about this before in a video when I talked about what I read last year. I have actually read this before. I just did a really quick reread because I was teaching it in my class on superheroes. They responded really well to the book. They liked the kind of popular criticism, history side of it. They didn't love the connections she was making to the actual Wonder Woman text, but that's not really the purpose of the book, and they understood that. So I'm really glad I assigned it. It hasn't made for a lot of really substantial discussions in relation to the comics, but we've been able to like supplement our discussions of the comics with what we now know about Wonder Woman's creator, and that's really, really cool to me. And just so you know, Wonder Woman's creator was like bizarre and really progressive at the same time as he was like very typically patriarchal. I mean, he has so many contradicting attitudes. He was like in a relationship with two, possibly three different women, had kids with two of them, and those two women ended up like living with each other past his death. I mean, it's such a cool story. He's also the inventor of the lie detector test, which is actually like maybe more famously known about him. But yeah, I would recommend this one if you have any interest in Wonder Woman, but just don't expect it to kind of tell you the meanings of the comics themselves. It's definitely more of a history. On Kate Howe's recommendation, I read the first in the Inspector Wexford series. It's called From Dune with Death by Ruth Rendell. I really loved this. I've never been able to get into Agatha Christie or Dorothy Sayers, and I'm going to try it again now that it's been a few years, but I've always found them very dry. For some reason, this kind of updated version really worked for me, and I felt like it was actually pretty progressive on gender and identity politics for the time period. There are still some things that you read and you're thinking, I wish she hadn't said that, but for the most part, it was like kind of careful and fragile with those things. I didn't get a whole lot of Wexford's character, and that actually excites me because there's what, like 20 something books. It's like up there, 23 at least, but more than that I think. But I feel like over the course of that many books, you don't want to like just completely reveal the character in the first one, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how it develops. The library does not have the next few books in this series. This is something that I will have to buy online, but they're all really cheap used, so I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. For the Readers Inc. book club, I blew through Sanctuary by William Faulkner. We extend the discussion through the month, and this one just grabbed me immediately, and I did not want to stop reading or stretch it out over a long period of time. I feel like Faulkner is better read in chunks because he kind of fragments his story, and in order to figure out what's going on and to really keep that narrative thread, I feel like you need to read it in big sections at a time. But I don't want to talk too much about this one because I will do a full video on Sanctuary. Just know that I loved it, that it was super violent and trashy. I'm so glad Conrad picked it. And also, just a heads up, you should really join the Readers Inc. book club. It's very cool. There's some great discussions going on Goodreads. I'll have the link down below. And next month we are reading Picnic at Hanging Rock, which I've always wanted to read. But you still have time to get in on the Sanctuary madness, so yeah, go and sign up. I also finished Career of Evil on audio. This is the J.K. Rowling, but Robert Galbraith series with Cormoran Strike. I'm finally kind of learning how to pronounce all these names. I hope that you are noticing and ready to praise me in the comments because it's difficult for me. Every part of me wants to call her J.K. Rowling. I just feel like that sounds better, but you know, it's fine. It's her name. I'll say it. I'll say it the right way, I guess. Anyway, this book is a continuation of that series. There's 3 now, and it's been my least favorite in the series. I still liked it, and I loved listening to it on audio. I still think that this narrator is one of the best audio narrators I've ever heard. There's just something about the pace and his voice that really works for me. But this one takes the point of view of the killer, which I really didn't like. I felt like a lot of cliches came up when she did it that way. And the other thing I didn't like was the development of Robin's character. And I don't want to give a lot away because as a part of a series, it's obviously going to spoil things in the first and second book. But suffice it to say, I really liked Robin in the first and second, and I have really high hopes for her. And I'm starting to feel a kind of connection to her as a character. And she disappointed me in this novel. If you've read this one, we can talk about it down in the comments, but I am not going to spoil anything further. Just know that Robin really needs to start making some better decisions in her life. I also read 2 graphic novel comicsy type things. I read the first 2 volumes of Scott Pilgrim. The first one's called Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life. I'd only seen this movie, I'd never read the comics before, and it is a very direct adaptation. From the pacing to the references to the actual appearance of the characters, it is like spot on. There are a couple little extra things in there that I'm finding interesting, but mostly it is another way to enjoy this story, so I'll be continuing with that. And the other graphic novel that I read this month was Delilah Dirk and the Turkish Lieutenant. I loved this. I saw that the sequel was coming out and that I had never heard of the original, so I grabbed this from the library. The publishers describe it as a female Indiana Jones, and that is very accurate, but she's like even more badass than Indiana Jones because she doesn't seem to have that kind of fear, but she has that grittiness and that like disgruntledness that usually male characters have. So it's exciting to see Delilah as a female character take on some of those qualities. It's not unheard of by any means, especially today and especially in comic books, but there's something really refreshing about her individuality and her relationship to others. So I didn't make a full video recommending this one in my weekly comics videos, which have sort of fallen off, I know, but I would definitely recommend Delilah Dirk and the Turkish Lieutenant. It's a long title, I always have to keep checking. So those are all the things that I read in the first half of April. It's been a whirlwind couple of weeks, but I still managed to read a whole lot of stuff. It's the way I cope. So I am looking forward to the second half of the month, and I will see you in my next video.